Hello, let's talk about books. Alright, so if you've been here for any length of time, you will know that I'm in the process of reviewing everything I read in 2022 in 5-book increments, and that's so that I have a hope of remembering what it is I read, because chronic illness fatigue is real, I gotta say. I don't even know what number we're up to. I've got my trusty bullet journal here. Again, I need this so I have a chance of remembering what it is that happened this year. It is just, oh, you guys. Okay, we are up to book 26. Now I had a reading goal of 52 for this year, so that's halfway. That's actually awesome. I read All the Seas of the World by Gavriel. This was new, released in May this year. If you watched my previous installment of this series, you'll see that I read the one that immediately precedes this. Was the last book of that video. And it's set in the same period of time, but it's also set like immediately after the events of the previous book, which is over here. A Brightness Long Ago. So by immediately after, we're talking like 5 years, I think. 4 years, says my notes. And All the Seas of the World is again one of those stories where an event happens that literally changes the world, but also changes the people who experience the events in rippling, consequential ways that you wouldn't expect at first, but of course, ripples. This is a hallmark of Gavriel, and when he doesn't write that, it's really weird. So I read it in May, just after it came out. I've written here in my notes, I felt really clever at picking up the theme in here of like returning or not to your home and your childhood, by which I mean you can't go back. You can go to the place, but you can't go back to that time, and you can't go back to what you had, whether it was good or whether it was bad. And this, you know, I was also thought I was really clever picking up on the theme of creating a home as an adult despite what happened to you in your younger years, of overcoming your past and integrating it into yourself, not letting it consume you, and basically the consequences of surviving. And I was feeling so clever, and then I read the acknowledgements, and it's written there exactly that. That is what the book is about. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not getting better at this book interpretation thing. So then I felt less clever. I'm not sure if this is one of my faves and I need to give it time to seep into me, but it's been months since I've read it now, and it's definitely something I think about a lot. I wouldn't read this, I mean, they're all standalone, but I wouldn't read this one if you haven't read A Brightness Long Ago, because the events so seamlessly intertwine and so many characters overlap, and I think it would just be a greater reading experience having read A Brightness Long Ago first. That doesn't mean to say that you can't, because they are all standalone really. I think you would just get greater value out of the book and out of the story if you'd read the other one first. Having said this one, I think it's like all of them, they need time to seep into me. I need time to digest what is happening and place it in the broader context of Kay's alternate history. And I think it's a great book in hindsight. At the time I was a bit like, okay. I've absolutely I gave it 4 stars, even though I did feel like I needed time to digest. So I really liked it. I really like Kay's stuff, as you know. You can't expect a negative review from me there. So let's move on. Alexis Henderson, The Year of the Witching. This is an interesting pick for me because I really wanted it because it looks cool. And it just kept coming up everywhere and just being on my radar, but also it's horror. I didn't want that. This was published in 2020, July 2020. I read it in between May and June this year. And I only read it because it fell into my Booktopia cart. What are you going to do? That's actually exactly what I've written here in my notes. It accidentally fell into my cart during a book buying spree. Oh no. Oh dear. It was definitely a horror to the point where I was having dreams of doing things like going to the shops and going to work because my brain was like, I cannot do this, I cannot deal. And yet it was really creepy, but ultimately underwhelming. Was I expecting more? I think so. I think that's what happens when books are underwhelming, is you were not given the book you thought you were getting. Not that the book is inherently dissatisfying. For the most part, there are obviously bad books out there. My notes say that it definitely started out creepy, but the second half of the book fell into what I consider predictable plot points. And maybe they're predictable because they're horror tropes, and so that's what you want from horror. That's not what I wanted from this story. I wanted something different. I wanted something that explained the hype that this book got. The Year of the Witching also got strong comparisons with The Handmaid's Tale, and I think that's just because of the cultish nature of the main town called Bethel, I think, where women are suppressed and repressed in the service of men, but The Handmaid's Tale did it so much better. The dialogue was so clunky, like it was such a mixture of formal and informal in the same sentence. It just felt like it was trying to be archaic, it was trying to be pilgrim, it was trying to evoke that sense of early America, but it just felt really clunky and weird, and I didn't like it. And in the process, like, I didn't really get like a solid vibe of who these people were. None of the characters were individual in the way that they expressed themselves, if you know what I mean. Like, any line of dialogue could have been any one of the women in the book. Any line of dialogue could have been any one of the men in the book. There was not really any individuality there. There are supposed to be sequels which haven't been written yet, but they are on the radar for Alexis Henderson, and I will not be picking them up. I gave this one 2.5 stars because I think I liked it. I don't know. I finished it. I liked parts of it. Some of it was creepy AF, and some of it was like, oh, okay. Next on my reading list was Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, which my book club read way in 2021, I think, way in the depths of pandemic, and I thought, there is no way I'm reading dystopia in the pandemic. Like, living it is plenty good enough for me right now. But then Lena Norms, a YouTuber that I follow, I will link her below, she read it, and as part of her No Books on a Dead Planet series, which I highly recommend, they approached it from the perspective of climate crisis rather than science fiction dystopia, which is my other book club. And so I picked it up because I wanted to be part of that conversation. And you know what? It's actually not that bad. Having been raised on an Australian YA 90s diet of dystopia, which a lot of those books were, this is really nothing. This was published in 1993 and I read it in June 2022. I love this cover, actually. So, if you do not know, this is the story of Lauren, who lives in Los Angeles with her family in a little walled enclave because society has collapsed because of climate crisis. And events ensue where she has to leave the enclave. That is a spoiler, I'm sorry. But this book is also 20 years old. 30 years old. See, there's my math skills. Then it becomes like on the road journey where she goes to find her people. And her people are people who believe this religion she's creating, or maybe not believe, but are intrigued by this religion she's creating called Earthseed. And she believes that the solution to the problems of humans on Earth is to leave Earth, to go in space. And I think, and one of the characters points it out, it's a really simplistic solution to a really complicated problem. But she, like a prophet, which obviously Parable of the Sower, that is what Lauren does if you're familiar with that Bible story. Like a prophet, she goes and she collects these people, she spreads her word, she spreads her earth seed, builds the foundations of a community who are willing to suspend their disbelief in order to be part of this community. I also enjoyed that Lauren in the book and Octavia E. Butler are former Baptists, and a lot of that informs what Lauren does and how the story is told through that religious or formerly religious lens. I love religion in my genre fic, which we know. I enjoyed Lauren's perhaps simplistic or intentionally simplistic evolution of her belief in God to adapt to her current circumstances and needs for hope. It's a book about finding hope. If you've not read it, read it. It's not as hard as you may have been led to believe. Did I buy this for the cover? Yes. Because it's set in Prague? Yes. Because it's obviously historical fantasy? Yes. This is Nicole Jarvis, The Lights of Prague. So this was published in May 2021. I read it in June this year, and it caught my eyes. Like, obviously, Eastern European and bats on the cover. It's got to be vampires, right? Obviously. Which it is. The blurb said witch across V.E. Schwab. So witch is obviously the Eastern European vibes. I think it's got Rivers of London vibes, which is Ben Aronovich. Anyway, this is the story of two main characters, one of which is a lamplighter. Lamplighters in 1868, when this book begins, are actually secretly vampire hunters because vampires come out at night, and other spooky demons as well. But also we've got this woman who's upper class, she's rich, she's a widow, and she's making friends with him. So obviously she's a vampire. He finds out that she's a vampire and there's consequences, but also there's like there's secretive underground vampires who are using science to make sure that they can't die when exposed to normal vampire killing things like being staked or exposure to sunlight. So it's a whodunit in that respect, and the vampire hunter and the vampire approach the whodunit from different angles because they're not speaking, because he's crossed that she's a vampire and he didn't know, and now he has fears and he can't kill her, and eventually they solve the whodunit. It's fine. It's an absolutely fine story. There's a romance with misunderstanding, LGBTQI representation, which is not the focus of either main character. It's an absolute love letter to Prague. There's a hair right here. Right there. Alright, let's continue. The plot wound itself pedestrianly to the conclusion with twists and betrayals and fighting. Oh my! I gotta tell you, this note-taking Elizabeth is a bit of a bitch. Ultimately, a happy / satisfactory conclusion. All threads tied neatly, no sequel coming. 3 stars. I liked it. I did actually like it, even though I have dissed it. It's absolutely readable, and if you're in the mood for like vampire hunting and crossed lovers and a whodunit and Prague, absolutely I would recommend. Are you sick of listening to me talk? Because I am sick of listening to me talk. Last one for this video is Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. This is the sequel to Parable of the Sower. This one came out in 1998 and I read it in June because I ordered this straight after I finished Parable of the Sower. Not gonna lie, this one was way more bleak. This is what I was expecting when I saw people comment about Parable of the Sower and how dark and dystopian it was, and I was like, that was nothing. But this one, dark, and I enjoyed it. It was definitely parts of the book that punched me in the gut, and that's a reaction I want from books. Most of this story is Lauren's daughter, who is reflecting back on her mother's life, and there's spoilers here, but again, this book is 25 years old. Lauren has a daughter who is taken away from her by ultra conservative Christians. Because Lauren's a heretic, she's built this Earthseed community which is viewed as a cult from the outside world. And so there's Lauren's journals, Lauren's husband's reflections, Lauren's brother's reflections, and of course her daughter. The Parable of the Talents metaphor here is as subtle as an anvil. I've got to say, if you're familiar with that parable, which is basically like God gives guys a bunch of money and says, here, spend it, share it around, and one of them hoards it for a rainy day. And the ones who spent their money were given more money by God, but the one who hoarded it was like, nah, you don't get nothing. You should have shared your wealth. And that's what happens here. The characters who hoard what they've given are not given any grace, whereas the ones who share everything they have find grace in their lives. Just after I finished reading this, and if you're familiar with the book, you'll understand, just after I finished reading this, the US Senate reversed the Roe v. Wade decision, and that is bleak AF in the context of reading this. But even though it's 1998, that is a while ago, but I think there could have been more. I wanted there to be more LGBT representation in this book, especially in the conservative Christian element and their crackdown, and the way that it affected the gay community, which this is set not that long in our future. I think it's set in like 2028 or something. So not that long in our future, there was no exploration of the way that it impacted the gay community. And I found that a disappointing aspect, but maybe that's just of its time. But also, I feel like it was part of the conversation, but maybe not part of the published conversation in 1998. So there was a tiny bit of exploration in the context of the events of the books, which I will not spoil. I've already given too many spoilers. And I was a bit disappointed about that, but maybe it's of its time. Also, like, the Parable series was meant to continue on. Butler was planning to write more, and just note out of it, she could not deal with just how bleak it was in writing these books. And I can see why, because this one was dark and interesting and absolutely believable in terms of the things that were perpetuated by ultra-conservative people in power. So that's exciting, yes. I gave it 4 stars, which means I really liked it. Although I hated how real it was, I've written here. Highly recommend reading both Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents if you are interested in dystopia. And that's a thing that you are mentally up to today. And on that note, that's another 5 books I read this year. If you want to see more of this, please subscribe, slide into my DMs if you want to chat about these books, or pop something in the comments below. And we will do more of this another time. So I will see you then. Bye. Oh, and by the way, like, linked below is my website where I write book reviews and skincare reviews, and I'm really shit at promoting that. So have a look if you like. Bye.